Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and since I've been talking a little bit lately about some of the upside and downside of ketogenic diets, let's talk a little bit about the difficulties of actually tracking calories on these type of diets. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. You know, it's always one of these things that people will act like, Jason, you're not talking from a experience. Yeah, a lot of times I am. Yeah, I study a lot. I read a lot. I read a lot of research, but I do have a lot of experience with these things. I have run ketogenic diets in the past and lost 50 pounds while on keto before. You guys have seen me do some of it. So I've done ketogenic diets. I actually have a lot of experience with them. I choose not to use them anymore for a variety of reasons. But when it comes to counting calories on a ketogenic diet, it is very difficult. And some people are going to be like, no, it's not. Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. I'm going to cover some of that in detail in a minute as someone who has experienced this and done a lot of measuring and stuff on these diets. But in general, calorie tracking is actually more difficult than people make it out to be. People have these weird ideas because of the if it fits your macros community that you can actually track your protein, carbs, fat within 1 to 2 grams. You know what? It's fucking impossible. It is fucking impossible with the technology most of you have in your house to actually track your carbs, fat, and protein to within 1 or 2 grams accurately. You can't fucking do it. And I know that's a shock to a lot of people, but that's because you need to understand your food measurements are an estimation. People are like, what? Yeah, it's true. When you see calories on a package for something, when it says 200 calories, that doesn't mean 200 calories. That means 180 to 220. It's a plus or minus 10%. And your food scales don't fix it because the problem is that the food scales, the stats that you have on whether it's like nutritiondata.org or MyFitnessPal, any of that, or even the published data you find anywhere, even from official government sources and everything, the data you have for food is an estimate. It's an estimate. There is almost no way with any food that has both liquid and dry components, or that has a mixture of different textures in it, you cannot track that stuff exactly. You can't get it perfect. And it's because the amount of moisture and water and everything in there actually will affect the scale weight versus the calories. Meaning, if you have some dry rice and you try to measure it, you do know that the moisture in it will vary from day to day. So your 1 pound bag of rice, if you were to take it into a different climate, it could change the weight of it by 5 to 10% just by different moisture in the air. All right, that's your dry measurement. Once you go to cooking and adding water, think about how much that affects it. Same thing even with meat. People are like, well, I've weighed out this meat. Well, do you know how dry or how moist the meat was when you weighed it? I mean, I understand if it's a freshly killed animal and you're getting it onto the scale within an hour of the animal being killed. Okay, I understand you'll get consistency there because there's been minimal shift in fluid. But do you honestly think that the chicken breast that you buy or the steak or whatever that you buy, the amount, if you were to weigh it before you cook it, you really think you're getting exact consistency? You realize that it being stored 1 day longer or 2 days longer than a different day or a slightly different temperature can affect the weight even though the calories have stayed the same. Once you start cooking it, the moisture becomes extremely variable that you've cooked out of it also for cooked weights. So the problem is with the moisture factor, you have to understand your estimates, your measurements, even with a digital scale measuring everything down to 1/10 of a gram, is an estimate. It's a ballpark, right? That's your best case scenario, is plus or minus 10%. And that's with wide varieties of foods. That's with most of the foods that you eat. Now, people who do ketogenic diets, anyone who's done one of these diets knows that you usually eat a lot of fatty meats. You eat a lot of fatty meats. And this gets important because you always see people who are like, well, I ate tons of calories on a ketogenic diet and I lost fat. And I lost fat more quickly than I did on a higher carb diet. Well, like I've said before, the research says that's not true. Studies in the metabolic ward are showing repeatedly that that's not true when they can control the caloric intake. When they can measure it and get it in plus or minus 10% using all their equipment, that's not actually true. So what's going on here? Well, people need to remember, first of all, we know that people are bad at reporting calories. All right, we've done studies on people when they're put on caloric restriction diets and they're taught how to measure their food. When their food logs are compared to hidden cameras watching them eat, we've seen differences between measured intake and reported intake as high as 2,200 calories a day. Meaning there are people who ate 2,200 calories different than what they thought they ate in a single day. They were off by 2,000 calories, basically. This is documented studies on this stuff, particularly when people start restricting calories. All right, it becomes common for people to consume more when they go on really low calories than they're measuring and what they're thinking. So a lot of people are like, well, I was on 2,000 calories of high carbs and I lost X amount of weight. Or I struggled to lose weight. It's like, well, maybe you were eating 2,600. Maybe your measurements were off. And then they're like, then I went on a ketogenic diet and I ate 3,000 calories and I lost a lot of weight. Well, first of all, you lost water weight, but how do you know you were on 3,000 calories? How do you know you were on 3,000 or 3,500 or whatever you said? Again, when we start cooking these really high-fat foods, they tend to lose a lot of calories. They tend to lose a lot of calories. And what ends up happening, you lose large amounts of greasy calories. I mean, when you cook 80% fat by calorie hamburger meat, like when it's raw, that's your raw measurement, it's hard to track how much you lose. People cook them on a Foreman grill. They cook them on a barbecue pit. They even cook them in the oven. You get this big pile of oily fat there. Well, are you drinking all of that? If you're not drinking all of that, you've got tons of calories in there. You've got an immeasurable amount because people can't even take it and weigh it on a scale. Do you know why? Because you don't know how much of it's water and how much of it is fat. You would actually have to separate it. Out, using various methods to even get close. So you don't know. Maybe you cooked 800 calories or 1,000 calories of that hamburger meat. You don't know how many calories you lost from the fat drippings around it. Was it 100 calories? Was it 400 calories? You don't always know, and people aren't sopping all of that up. Same thing, they do bacon, they do sausage, everything else. They're losing fat calories everywhere that gets dripped off that they're not able to track. All right, when you start cooking really fatty meats, which is what you're eating on ketogenic diets, it becomes very, very difficult to track your caloric intake. It becomes very difficult. Now, I understand if someone lives on a ketogenic diet of nothing but peanut butter that they weigh out on a scale, which is difficult to do with the stickiness of it and everything on the spoon. It's a lot of trouble to weigh out peanut butter on a scale. So if people are just guesstimating off the spoon size, they could be off by 20 to 30%. So, their 800 calories of peanut butter could be 1,000. It could be 600. And, that's not even counting that plus or minus 10%. That could be based off the weight. They could be off that much just trying to eyeball it with spoons. It's hard to get it all off the spoon and measure it. No one weighs out all their peanut butter who's on a keto diet. Some people might, but it's hard. But if you did that, you did all nuts and eggs, because the egg, you can self-contain the fat and cook it in. But that's not how most people are doing keto diets. They're eating bacon, they're eating sausage, they're eating hamburger meat. They're doing all these things, and it is very difficult because you can't easily track how much fat you've lost based on the different cooking method and how many calories with these really calorically dense high-fat foods. It becomes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to keep track of the fat calories. It is, again, unless you're using foods in which it's all self-contained and sealed in for you to eat, you don't know how much you're losing. So there's a lot of cases of people who are on the ketogenic diets who think they're eating more calories than they are, even when they're trying to measure things because of the loss, the spillover of the fat. Now you combine that with the fact that ketogenic diets cause appetite suppression for many people. It's like I've said before, you have the fact that this diet is successful not because it works calorically. We know that from a metabolic perspective, it's the least efficient diet, all right? Meaning you don't have a metabolic advantage. It has the worst metabolic advantage of any macronutrient dominant diet. When you compare a mostly fat diet, a mostly carb, or mostly protein, the mostly fat, the ketogenic diet, loses on the thermic end. It loses on the metabolic advantage end. It actually is the worst. So you don't lose body fat more quickly on it. You lose it slower on a calorie per calorie basis by a tiny amount. But it's appetite suppressing for many people. Ketones suppress appetite for many people. They cause a mild nausea that makes you not always crave food. So you've got that factor. And then you have the fact that limited food selection eventually makes you want to eat less. Meaning people who only don't get a lot of variety in their diet, they tend to not overeat as much because they eat the same foods over and over and over. Less variety in your diet makes individual foods less appetizing over the weeks and months. So therefore, you just tend to eat less of them in every serving. You eat less of them in every serving. Now, that holds true even for people's cheat foods, but they'll still get really fat, meaning that the same thing will happen to someone who were to eat an all pizza diet. If pizza's a treat food for you, you're going to get fat if you just gorge on pizza every day. But eventually, if you only eat pizza every single day, you are going to, over the course of months, eat less and less. Your weight gain is going to slow down because you have no variety in your diet. You're going to tend to want to eat less of the only food that you're allowed to eat. And the same thing holds true of these foods, because most ketogenic foods, while they're really rich in fatty foods, they're not always, sometimes they can be very appetizing, but they're not always the most appetizing. They don't always cause cravings in people. And so over time, even if you love eating steak and you love sirloin steak, if you're eating sirloin steak every single day for 2 of your meals every day, eventually you're going to start leaving some on the plate. It's going to become less and less appetizing after several months of eating it every single day. So that's the other method by which these ketogenic diets work. But the actual calorie tracking is very difficult on any diet. Ketogenic diets, because of the food selection and the cooking methods involved, is actually even more difficult to actually track calories. And it's very, very easy to overestimate the calories that you're eating on a ketogenic diet, which is one reason a lot of these people feel like, well, I mean, I ate more calories on it because, you know, these high calorie foods and I lost more weight. Well, maybe you weren't eating more calories and you lost more water weight on top of it. So you factor that in, and that will mess with people's memories. And that's why people have to be very careful about anecdote. And we need to remember, in general, self-reported calorie intake is never accurate in nutrition studies, because there's been so many studies showing how bad people are at it, even when they think they're doing good. Even people with a digital scale and a book where they write everything down, humans tend to be pretty bad at being able to self-track their own calories without another person doing it for them. We're bad at it as a species. Most people are. You combine that with the difficulties of measuring the food correctly for a lot of ketogenic foods, and it's easy to see how this becomes just very, very difficult to get an accurate measurement. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.